Sefer Devarim, as we know, is called Mishneh Torah by Chazal. It's called the repetition of the Torah, Mishneh from the Lashon of Shnayim, or from the Lashon of Shinun, meaning to repeat something. Known in English as Deuteronomy, from the Greek, meaning again the prefix deut, meaning two, the same word basically, just in English, in Latin, in Greek. And basically we have to ask the question, why is it necessary for the Torah to give us the same thing again? Meaning, if it's a repetition, why is it necessary? We always say that every word in the Torah is weighed carefully, and nothing is extraneous, nothing is unnecessary. So, if this is, then why is it there? Okay, so we begin in Parak Aleph. First is an introduction. We'll skip over the introduction for a moment. The narrator of Sefer Devarim, Hashem, gives us a little introduction about where this speech took place. The beginning of the speech is in Parak Aleph Pasuk Vav. Moshe begins, Hashem Elokeinu diber elinu b'chorev limor. Hashem, our God, spoke to us in Chorev at Sinai and said to us, Rav lachem shevet bahar hazeh. You've been sitting at this mountain for a long time. Meaning, after Matan Torah, Hashem said, after we had been there for a long time, you've been here for a long time. Penu u's'u lachem uvo har ha'emori. Turn and begin to travel and go up to the mountain of Emori, ve'elkol shreinav and the other mountains, ba'arva v'har v'shpela v'negev v'chof hayam, eretz hakanani v'alabanon ad nahar agdol nahar prat. It's time for you to turn and go to Eretz Yisrael. Ve'ein atati lefnechem et haaretz. Look, I now give you the land. Bo urshu et haaretz asher nishpa Hashem l'avotechem. Come and inherit the land that Hashem promised to your forefathers, l'Abraham, l'Yitzchak, l'Yaakov, l'Tit lahem, l'Zaram acharehem, to give them, to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and to their children afterwards. Moshe Rabbeinu continues, Va'omar elechem, Moshe quotes himself as saying to the people then, Va'itahi limor, said to you at that time, Lo chal levadi se'etitchem, I alone cannot carry you. Hashem elokechem hirbayitchem, Hashem your God has increased you. V'hinechem hayam kechochovei hashamayim larov. You are as numerous as the stars of the heavens. Hashem Elokei avotechem Yosef alechem kachem elef pamim. May Hashem make you even 1,000-fold greater. V'yivarech etchem kasher diber lachem, and may He bless you as He has promised you. However, in the meantime, I can't do it alone. How can I bear all of the burdens and solve all the disputes that come up? I want you to propose people who are smart and wise and well known to all of your tribes, and I will appoint them as your leaders. And the people agreed. You answered me and said, we approve. You've had a good idea. We will do it. I took the heads of your tribes, men who were wise and known, and I appointed them as captains of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, and also shotrim, police or enforcers, something like that. And I instructed them about how they should carry out their duties, and that was that. And then we began to travel. So we have to ask, the first important question we have to ask about Sefer Devarim is, if this is a review, even a didactic review, meant to teach people from the experiences that they've experienced, why does Moshe start where he starts? Why doesn't he start with Yetziat Mitzrayim? Or start even before that with the Shibud, and learn all the lessons that there are to be learned from the Shibud, from the experience of having been slaves? We learn so much from that. We learn so much sensitivity to other people and to the experiences that they're going through, especially to the downtrodden and the underprivileged and the protectorless. So why not start with there, or start at least with Yetziat Mitzrayim and with all the makot that Hashem did, which was our introduction to Hashem and Hashem's love for us and Hashem's devotion to us, or at least with Kriyat Yamsuf, or with the beginning of the falling of the Man, or with Matan Torah. All these things are skipped. And instead, Moshe begins with what appears to be not that important an event, something which is lost in the shuffle in Parshat Yitro, which is the appointment of the Shoftim, the judicial system. And we have to ask, why does Moshe start with this, and why skip over all those other things? We continue. Hashem commands that they go and inherit Eretz Yisrael. So they Moshe stops for a minute to talk about the appointment of the system of leaders, and then we skip to Pasuk Chaf Bet. V'atikruvun elai kulchem v'tamru. So now that we were going to take up the project that Hashem charged us with, going to Eretz Yisrael and inheriting and conquering, so you came to me and you all said, "Vatikruvun elai kulchem v'tamru." You all came to me and you said, "Nishlachan Hashem lefanenu." Let us send people before us, v'yachbru lana b'ta'aretz, and they will spy out the land for us. V'yashivu otanu devar et haderech asher na'aleh, and they will return a report to us about which way we should take, which path we should take into the conquest. Ve'eta arim asher navo alehan, which cities we will encounter, they'll tell us the lay of the land. Makes sense. That's what you do in any military campaign. You figure out what is ahead of you. Va'ita b'nei hadavar. This is the opposite of the previous event. In the previous event, it was Moshe's idea to appoint assistants, to appoint people to help him with the leadership, and then the idea was tov b'nei the people. Now, this is an idea that comes from the people, and it's tov b'nei Moshe. So this, I found this to be a good idea to send spies, and I took 12 men, one from each tribe, and they went up. They spied out all the way to Nachal Eshkol. They took fruits. They came back with a report, and they said, the land that Hashem is giving us is a great land. It's a really good land. End of report. And then what happened? But you, Moshe says to the people, you did not want to go up to the land. And you rebelled against the word of Hashem your God. And you rebelled in your tents, and you complained, and you said, Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim in hatred for us. To give us over to the hand of the Emori who would destroy us. How can we go up? Our brothers have melted our hearts, have scared us by saying, Am gadol varam mimenu. The nation there is a nation which is greater and higher, mightier, stronger, taller than we are. Arim gedolot u'tzorot b'shamayim, great cities fortified up to the heavens. V'gam b'nei anakim reinu shem, and we saw there also giants. So we do see now the other half of the report of the Meraglim, which Moshe skipped a moment ago when he reported what the Meraglim had said, which is the people there are very powerful, not just the land is wonderful, but the people there are very powerful, more powerful than we are, and giants and all that other stuff. But Moshe reports that only as the people quoting that report. So it's not Moshe quoting the Meraglim, it's Moshe quoting the people quoting the Meraglim, and Moshe fully blames the people, not the Meraglim. Right? You turned against Hashem. And I said to you, don't be afraid, Hashem will help you. But you did anyway, and you rejected the land that Hashem had given you. So we have many questions to ask about this episode. Question number one is, why is this the next thing that Moshe reports? In Sefer Devarim is it's Moshe's platform. It's Moshe as he's up on the stage. This is his chance to deliver lessons that he wants the people to take with him. So why does he choose this next? In other words, the first thing he says is, out of the blue, we were sitting at Sinai for a long time, and finally after Hashem told us that we should go to Eretz Yisrael, so I said, you know what, I can't do this on my own, I need help, I need other leaders to help with me. So we hear the story about that. The very next thing that we hear is, okay, then we turn to go to Eretz Yisrael, and you said, hold on a second, we want to send spies. And then when the spies came back with their wonderful glowing report, you rejected the word of Hashem, the promises of Hashem, and refused to go up. Why is this the next thing that Moshe reports? What's he up to? The next thing to ask is, of course, why are there differences between this account of the spies and the account of the spies, the Meraglim, that we read in Parshat Shlach? This implicitly is the answer to the question that we asked before. We asked before, why do we have Mishneh Torah? Why do we have a repeated Torah? The Torah doesn't waste words at all. But here we have part of the answer, which is that Moshe is reporting what was said before. He's reporting the story of the Meraglim, but he's not reporting it the way that it was told before. So the answer to why we have a Mishneh Torah is because it's not a repetition at all. This time the stories are told, they're told differently. And the truth is, if you think about it, that's very natural. Anytime you hear a story told by different people, you'll hear differences, because each person has their own perspective. So here we're hearing the perspective of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the next question to ask, of course, is, well, what is the perspective of Moshe Rabbeinu? What is the the goal of Moshe Rabbeinu in telling these stories. What is he going to emphasize, and how is that going to be different than the original account in the Torah, and why? In other words, every time in Sefer Devarim we come across an account which is a retelling of something that happened before, we're going to have to ask ourselves several questions. Number one, what are the differences between this and the previous time this was told? Number two, if there are discrepancies, how do we resolve the discrepancies? What really happened? If we have two different versions of the event, what really happened? And then number three, which I consider the most important question in looking at the discrepant versions, what is the point of each version? In other words, each version emphasizes something different. So what is the goal of each version which causes it to emphasize the things that it does? Okay, so if we look at this example, this is just an example that we can learn from, that we can take this methodologically and run with it through Sefer Devarim. There are several differences. Anybody who remembers Parshat Shlach, which was not that long ago, should pick up on them pretty quickly. The first difference is that in Parshat Shlach, the person who comes up with the idea for the scouts, the spies, isn't the people, and it isn't Moshe, it's Hashem. Hashem comes to Moshe and says, Shlach l'cha anashim, I want you to send out people via Turu at Eretz Canaan, and they will scout out Eretz Canaan. Moshe, of course, enthusiastically agrees and commands them, the spies, the scouts, about their mission and what specifically they're supposed to look for, but the person who comes up with the idea is Hashem. The people don't seem to have any particular reaction. Whereas in our version, in Parshat Devarim, it's the people, Vatikruvun alai kulchem, the people, not just the people, but all the people. They all thought it was a good idea. You all came to me and said that we should do this, and Moshe says, and then I thought it was a good idea, and then we did it. Hashem's role is entirely left out. And the primary role is the people's. Second major difference in this account is that, and this I mentioned before pretty much, hinted to it before at least, in the original account of the Meraglim come back. They're never called Meraglim there, they're called Tarim, they're called scouts. They come back, and they come to the forum of the entire leadership of the people, headed by Moshe, but in front of the entire nation, and they report Tovah ha'aretz me'od ma'od, and Zeh Pirya, and they show the wonderful, beautiful fruits that they brought. And then they say, Efes, however, Ki az ha'am ha'yoshev ba, that the people who live there are very strong and powerful, and they're giants, and they're stronger than we are, etc., etc. And then when Kalev tries to convince the people, yes, it's true, but we can still do it. In other words, Kalev doesn't say that what they said isn't true about those powerful people. He just says it's not relevant, because Hashem has promised us that He will help us. And then the Meraglim say, no, we won't be able to do it. In other words, there is the first time that they say something which is explicitly wrong, which is explicitly sinful, which is, until now they said the good things about the land, and then they said the challenging things about the land. And Moshe had asked that question. He asked about the people. He said, Chazaku harafeh. Are the people who live there strong or weak? And they are coming back and saying, Chazaku, they're strong. So that's part of their mandate, and that's Beseder Gamor, that is entirely legitimate. What's not legitimate is they're telling the people, we can't do it, and despite what Hashem has promised us, we don't have a shot. In the account in Parshat Devarim, Moshe eliminates entirely that half, the second half of the Meraglim speech, where they say that the people there are stronger than we are. All he has the Meraglim reporting is that Tovah ha'aretz me'od ma'od, it's wonderful, and here is the fruit of it. And then the people say, well, we can't do it, we're afraid, we won't be able to do it. And only in the people's complaining do we hear that the Meraglim actually said that the Canaanites are too strong. Moshe completely places the blame for this, for the rebellion, in the hands of the people. So of course the question is what's going on here. And it's, I think it's reading between the lines. It's not that subtle. It's not that difficult to figure out. What's going on is that the people are now facing round two. This is the second generation. These are the people who actually will leave the desert and enter Eretz Yisrael. They will encounter those powerful Canaanites, and they remember what was said a generation ago. They remember what happened to that previous generation. Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to inoculate them against the mistakes of the past. So he places responsibility squarely in their laps. And he says, the people did this. The people made this mistake last time around. Don't make this mistake this time around. So how does Moshe place the responsibility squarely in their laps? First of all, he says, this idea was your idea. You all came to me and you said, this is what we want to do, we want to send spies. And I agreed. Moshe takes responsibility too. I agreed, but the responsibility is squarely in the people's court. It's not that Hashem came up with this idea and sort of foisted it upon you, and then you were put in the circumstantial position of having received all kinds of scary feedback about Eretz Yisrael, based on a mission that wasn't your idea at all, a mission of spies that wasn't your idea at all. Instead, this was your idea. This was your idea. So you take responsibility for sending these scouts. You take responsibility for reacting to what happened. Now, in terms of what really happened, in terms of putting the two versions together, so it's fairly easy to suggest that, in fact, what happened was a combination of what is told in Parshat Shlach and what is told in Parshat Devarim. In other words, the people came to Moshe, said we want to send spies, and as very often happened throughout Sefer Bamidbar, when the people came to Moshe with a question or a suggestion or a problem, so Moshe went to Hashem and consulted Hashem, and Hashem said, here's what you should do. So the people, I am projecting, I'm suggesting, there's no way to know for sure, but the people came to Moshe and said, we want to send spies. Moshe thought it was a good idea, consulted Hashem, Hashem commanded him, yes, that's a good idea. Shlach v'cha anashim v'yatur et Eretz Canaan, and they will spy out Eretz Canaan. And then Moshe went and did it. However, in Sefer Bamidbar, the people's responsibility isn't yet known when we read the story for the first time, because we don't know that they're going to mess up. We don't know that they're going to rebel, and that this mission is going to blow up in their faces. So the Torah reports it as if it's Hashem's command, because it is Hashem's command. And at that point, we don't know that taking responsibility is an issue, because we don't know that there's going to be a mess to clean up afterwards. Now that we know that there's a mess to clean up afterwards, and Moshe is trying to inoculate the next generation about making the same mistake, he says, you've been in this position before. You wanted the spies, the scouts, to be sent, and they were sent at your behest, and then you couldn't handle what they came back and reported to you. This time it's important to make sure to react differently. In the same sense, when Moshe reports what the Meraglim reported, when Moshe tells Bnei Israel now in this speech, when Moshe tells them what the Meraglim came back and said, he leaves out the part where the Meraglim delivered scary feedback about Eretz Yisrael, or where the Meraglim said, we can't do it, we can't manage it, even with Hashem's help, we don't believe, we don't have faith. Because, in the end of the day, that's not the point either. The point for this generation is, you've got to take responsibility for your own emunah. You've got to take responsibility for your own bitachon and Hashem. It doesn't matter what anyone says to you. It doesn't matter how scary the reports you hear. You've got to say to yourself, in the end of the day, Hashem is on our side and we can make it. That's what's important for you to do. So in the end, that failure was yours, that failure was the people's, and this success will be a success only if you make it your own as well. So perhaps that is the explanation for the differences between this story of the Meraglim and the previous story of the Meraglim, and also an explanation for why there are the differences that there are. Why does Moshe take the perspective that he does here? I want to briefly also highlight another aspect of this week's Parsha, and in fact it's an opposite aspect of this week's Parsha, and that is the warnings about not conquering. Here we go. Perek Bet, Sefer Devarim Perek Bet, Pasuk Bet. Hashem says to Bnei Israel, and this is something that had happened already, so Moshe is just reporting to it. Moshe is reporting this statement of Hashem. Vayom Hashem Elaylam, Hashem said to me, Rav Lachem Sov Tahar Hazeh, you've been at this mountain for a long time. Har Seir. Pinu Lachem Tzafona, turn to the north towards Eretz Yisrael. In other words, after spending 40 years in the desert, now it's time to make another try at Eretz Yisrael. This was something that you experienced with me, Moshe Rabbeinu was saying to the people. This isn't something that happened in the last generation. This is something that happened in your lives. Ve'eta'am tzav limor, command the people, Hashem says, Atem uvrim b'gvul achichem b'nei Esav, you are passing through the borders of your brother, the children of Esav. Hayashvim b'Seir, who live in Seir, v'yiru umikem, they will be afraid of you. V'nishmartem ma'od, now you got to be really careful. You have to be careful. Al titkaruvam, do not start up with them. Ki lo aten lachem me'artzam ad midrach kafraga. I'm not going to give you even one footstep, one foot breadth of their land. Ki Yerusha Esav natati tar Seir, because I gave that land as Yerusha to Esav. Ochel tishbru meitam b'kesef, you can buy food from them, and you can pay for water from them, because, but I'm not going to let you conquer their land, so be sure that you don't start up with them. It's interesting. Why is this reported? Meaning, that happened, but why is this reported? Why is this in the headlines of Moshe's speech to Bnei Israel? Why is this, first of all, how is it connected at all to what happened before? And second of all, since Moshe skipped 38 years, right? He started from the disaster of the Moriah, which was in the second year of their leaving Eretz Yisrael, and now he's in basically the 40th year. So why did he skip suddenly to this? And why report all the details of what Hashem said to him? And Hashem said, you're going to Seir, and you're going to pass through the land of the people of Edom. Be very careful, don't start up with them. You have to pay for everything. What is the relevance of that here? What's the lesson to be learned from that? If you look at Pasuk Tet, you find the same thing again, but about a different nation. We turned away from Edom because they wouldn't let us pass through their land, and we went through towards Moab. Hashem said, do not lay siege to Moab and do not start up with them. I'm not going to give you any of their land at all. Given it to the children of Lot. In other words, this is Mishpacha. Esav is Mishpacha and Lot is Mishpacha, so you don't take anything from them. And then we have a whole story here about who used to live in the land before Moab did, before Lot did. Ha'imim lefanim yeshvu ba, am gadol varav varam ka'anakim. The people who lived there before Moab was the Imim, and they were very powerful, just like giants. R'fa'im yechashvu avim ka'anakim va'amavim ikram imim u'v'seir yeshvu hachorim lefanim u'vnei Esav Yerushim. All the story about who lived in Seir before Esav did, and all the people who lived in Moab before Moab did. What's the difference? What is the difference? Right? And then we have this same phenomenon a third time. Pasuk Yudchet. Vayidaber Hashem Elai Limor. Hashem said to me, Atzah over Hayom et Gevul Moab et Ar. You're passing past Moab. V'karavtam mu b'nei Ammon. And now you're going to encounter the land of the people of Ammon, another cousin of yours. Al titzureim, don't lay siege to them. V'al titkarbam milchama. V'al titkarbam, don't start up with war with them. Ki eloetin meretz b'nei Ammon l'cha Yerusha. Ki l'nei Lot and t'ti Yerusha. That's also for the children of Lot. I'm not giving you any of it. And then we hear again the whole story about who used to live there before the people of Ammon and how Hashem drove them out, etc., etc. And then we come back, it says in Pasuk Kafet, just like what I did for Esav. So it's so strange. It's so strange. And then we hear it again in Pasuk Kafet, Ka'asher asu li b'nei Esav ha'yoshvim b'seir v'amoavim ha'yoshvim ba'ar asher avaret ha'Yarden. So, What's going on here? Why are we hearing all this detail in his speech, in the beginning of his speech to Bnei Israel? Why is Moshe reporting all the different warnings that Hashem gave him about not attacking Edom and Moab and Ammon? And number two, how does this follow on what we just heard from Moshe Rabbeinu, the lessons to be learned from the Moriah disaster? The answer, I think, is that Moshe is trying to give Bnei Israel balance. Very often in life, it's very difficult for us to be somewhere in the middle. We can either be 0 or we can be 100, but it's very difficult for us to be 50. Bnei Israel in the previous generation, when it comes to the ability to conquer, they were 0. In other words, they said, we just came out of Mitzrayim, we don't know how to fight, we're scared, we're weak, we don't know anything, we can't do it. And so despite the assurances of Hashem, despite being accompanied by the powerful God who had brought Egypt to its knees, they refused to continue the journey, and instead they spent the rest of their lives nowhere, basically. As far as conquering is concerned, they said, we're 0, we can't do it. The danger is that the next generation, which has faced battle and has been successful in battle, utterly wiped out the people in the kingdom of Sichon, utterly wiped out the people in the kingdom of Og, and now they're facing war in and around Canaan. So the danger here is a danger in both directions. Either you might repeat the mistake of the previous generation and be 0 in terms of conquering, or you might make a new mistake, the opposite mistake, that instead of just conquering, you'll become conquerors. And that's an incredible danger. Hashem is saying to the Jewish people, Moshe is now saying to the Jewish people, you're now in the mode of conquering. That's our next project, is we're going to go to Eretz Yisrael and we're going to conquer. But in the process, you have to be very, very careful not to become a conqueror. How many empires have we witnessed throughout history that have not only succeeded within their own borders, but then have burst forth from their own borders to conquer large parts of the known world. That, Moshe Rabbeinu was saying to the Jewish people, is not our goal. That is not our destiny. We do not aspire to conquer all the people around us. We do not aspire to conquer our neighbors. All we aspire to do is to conquer our own land. On the one hand, not to be zero and to let our fears rule us, to let our fears conquer us, and to fail to conquer even our land, like the previous generation did. And that's the whole Meraglim story. On the other hand, not to go to the other extreme and become so gung-ho, so obsessed with conquest, so obsessed with our own success at conquest, that we end up trying to conquer just for the sake of conquest, and instead of conquering only our own land, we conquer our neighbors and begin to spread beyond our borders, which is something Hashem never intended, and is something that He doesn't want us to do. Not only do we learn that Hashem has destiny in mind for the people of Edom and Moab and Ammon, that we have a promised land, but so do other nations. Hashem had in mind other land for other nations. It's not that there's only one nation in the world that receives a promised land. There are other nations also that also have their land that Hashem had intended for them. And if we try to conquer the land of those people, Hashem will not even give us a foot breadth of those people's land. So the lesson here is, number one, Hashem has a plan, not just for Klal Yisrael, Hashem has a plan for other nations as well. And before we engage in conquest, we need to be aware of that and think about that, because we're not just threatening Ammon, Moab, and Edom. We're in fact going against Hashem's plan. And the separate thing is that in the process of conquering, we have to make sure not to become conquerors, not to become in our mentality, not to become in our identity, in the way that we look at ourselves, in the way that we construct our society, the way that we construct our values, and the way that we talk about war with our children. It is a necessary mode of behavior, of action that we engage in order just to accomplish certain goals. But it is not an end in and of itself. It's not a goal that we see as part of Jewish life. Conquest is not an end. It is merely a means. It's a way of accomplishing a certain something. Once that thing is accomplished, then conquest disappears from our modes of behavior, our modes of action, our lexicon, our thoughts, and instead we live our positive, productive lives without trying to subdue other people's and to take their land from them. So, in sum, that's Parshat Devarim. On the one hand, when it comes to conquest, when it comes to conquering, not to make the mistakes of the previous generation and to be conquered by fear. On the other hand, not to go from the 0 extreme to the 100 extreme, and instead to become transformed into conquerors, but instead to have this card in our deck, to have this trick in our bag of tricks, this ability to be able to conquer, but in the process not to become conquerors ourselves. Shabbat Shalom.